Jackie, I need to stop you because you're currently sitting in a feeling of a bit of disbelief in yourself. She said, we just need to turn on that light switch.
Welcome to Your Second Act, the podcast that proves that life doesn't have to end at 40, 50, or even 60, because when it comes to living your best life, age is just a number. Hello, lovely, and welcome back to another wonderful episode. Now, how many times have you sat there and you've had this idea and you've talked yourself out of it? Maybe it was for a product, a business, a creative project, something that made you think, you know what, this could actually work. And for a moment, you felt really excited. But then the doubt creeps in and you think to yourself, I wouldn't even know where to start. It's probably too hard. What if it fails? Who am I to do something like that? You know, those lovely little thoughts that we have, and you just end up shelving the idea. And then one day you see someone else doing something similar and you think, why didn't I just have the courage or the get up and go to just have a go? Well, today's guest, Jackie, is someone who decided not to shelve an idea. And after nearly 2 years of what she calls, and which I love, the director of Family Matters, she had a very relatable light bulb moment born somewhere between carpooling runs and very smelly boys. That moment became Neon Goat, a vegan, cruelty-free deodorant born out of real life. But this episode isn't about deodorant. It's about how you take an idea, something that starts in everyday life, and actually bring it to fruition, how you move from that's a good idea to, you know what, I'm actually going to do this. So if there's an idea that's quietly sitting in the back of your mind, this conversation might be just what you need to give you that push. But just before we dive into this conversation, one of my goals this year is to get Your Second Act into the top 5% in this category of podcasts. And rating and reviews really make a big difference. So if you're enjoying these conversations, it would mean so much if you could take a minute to rate and review. And who knows, I might be here later on in the year telling you that I've actually achieved that goal, which would be amazing. So now let's just get into my episode with Jackie. Jackie, I want you to take me back to that moment when you're in the car. The windows are down, you're driving, very sweaty boys after sport or school, and you have this light bulb moment. How did you go from, I am so sick of ferrying around smelly boys, to the, I'm actually going to do something to solve this problem? Now, you're coming from a space that you were a stay-at-home mum for about 18 years, and this is what I love about your story. You actually thought, I'm going to do something. I'm going to get off my butt and I'm going to make this thing happen. And I find that is so empowering. But like many of us who have these ideas, we have them and then they go because we think this is just a bit too hard. How did you actually get it going? What did you do to start it all?
Sure. Well, it was an aha moment. And yes, all I really have to do, I often make this sign with my hands that I'm driving in the car. There could be 5 to 6 boys in the back
Yep.
seat, in the front seat. I was that typical mum that was carpooling carloads of boys literally every day across the state, not even just in our area, but across the state, soccering, basketballing, the karate dojo, the tennis. It was literally game on. And it was fine when they were little, because then it's just about having a really messy car full of snacks. But when you're erring on the age of 10, 11, 12 and heading towards puberty, every mum will know that you literally cannot drive with the windows up, either because of the body odor or these toxic sprays that boys will often come in the car and start spraying these supermarket sprays. That's how I kind of refer to them. I don't like to name and shame, but they were giving me headaches. They were often giving some of the boys headaches. And it was that truly aha moment of, what can I do about it? This is the world that I live in. And I guess the question became when. So I had sat on the idea for a little while. And to be honest, and I do like to be honest when I share my story, COVID wasn't kind to a lot of
Mm.
people, but mentally and emotionally, and even I guess physically for me, that typical mum that used to drive, 2, 3 times to school in the morning, every after school activity under the sun. During that period of COVID, I described my world went quiet. My kids were being homeschooled, but they weren't young. They didn't need me to homeschool
Yeah.
them. And I would often take myself during the middle of the day for these walks. And for the first time in about 16 years, since I was that full-time director of family matters, that I say, that CEO of the family, I felt like I could actually breathe again. I had a little bit of time, and slowly these creative ideas and this new kind of feeling that I have time, I've got time to think, I've got time for myself. And that was the moment. So I had the moment in the car of, I can't do this anymore. The BO is just too much, and I'm just not liking the products the boys are using. And then it coincided so nicely with this time personally for me, where I had a little bit more time to actually go, I think this is my moment. And I knew that there would be a runway where my kids were going to start to become more and more independent. The daughter starting to drive, the son I'm starting to teach how to drive. And we all know when we're heading there, you start to go, well, I'm going to actually have more time on my hands. And I just remember standing in the middle of the
Mm.
street one day during COVID and called my husband and I said, that idea that I've had, I'm actually going to do something about it. So, yeah,
Wow. What was that feeling like to actually go, that's it. I'm going to do it. No more excuses. I'm going to step
it
into it.
was truly, I guess, a mix of really liberating and quite daunting at the same time. Because as you mentioned, and I do own this as part of my story, I have a backstory pre having my kids, which we can go into later. But I really had been focused on my
Mm.
family for many years. So liberated as in, now is the time, I have the time, and I'm going to press the gas. But daunting in terms of, can I do this? Is this really happening? Who does this at the age of 46? Questions that I think your audience might have, similar aged women, similar stage in our
Mm.
lives. Do I really do this at
Yeah,
46?
because I always talk about the imposter syndrome. It's there. It's like your little best friend, isn't it? And then you start to question yourself, like, who am I to do this? Can I do it? Will people laugh at me? All of those things go through your head. So, and I think that's what keeps a lot of us trapped in our heads and not
Mm,
wanting to move forward. But what I admire is people like yourself who probably felt all those things, but push through. And that's the message that I want to get out there, is that it is possible. You can push through all of that and then finally say, okay, I'm doing this for myself. So, I
mm.
mean, let's go back to, what are the first practical steps of trying to come up with something? Well, you came up with the idea, obviously. Smelly boys was the inspo.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
smelly boys is the idea. I think often you want to see or suss out, is there
Yeah.
really an opportunity? So the first step I would suggest to people is, you have to go and put in those hours of doing the deep dive. You have to research, you have
Mm.
to get out there. How large is the opportunity? Is it a niche market? So Neon Goat
Mm-hmm.
is a niche brand, as in it's not a product for everyone. It's not even a product for all men, although all men can use it. But the brand story was quite niche. So when I drill down to it, it's a natural body care brand for tween and teenage boys. I thought there was a gap in the market, but depending on whatever product or service you're providing, as I mentioned, you just have to get out there. So again, I was fairly lucky in COVID. I could do that dive because I could still go to the supermarkets and just have a look at those aisles. And I pretty much knew I was onto something because from floor to ceiling in those typical supermarket aisles is pretty much unnatural sprays for men. There certainly wasn't anything targeting the tween or teenage boy market. And then when I look to the left, and there might have been a couple of brands in the women's aisle, I describe them a bit like Byron Bay brands, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just my sons wouldn't use that, crafty packaging, not really messaged towards the boys. So as far as research, and then you obviously do your deep dive online, there can be some, more indie brands that are available online. Still nothing really surfaced. Then I took it overseas, started researching in America and Europe, and there were a couple, but I still saw it as an opportunity. So I think researching is one part of activating that process. You can't just stand there and go, I have an idea and then what? So researching, is the product available? What is the market size? Is there really an opportunity? I was lucky in that I was sitting on an idea of a brand that I literally, and for want of a better term, lived and breathed in this market, because I actually knew from my marketing and advertising background that the product is for the boys, and I had two or they were actually tweens at the time, but you really have to convince the mum. The mum holds the purse strings, and the mum really is that kind of overarching decision maker for those family household goods. So I had to be speaking to the mum, and as I often say, the product has to be cool enough that the boys would just pull it out of their footy bag, soccer kit, tennis bag, and and so on and so forth. So I then thought, well, again, it's COVID. I can't really, take this and do a bucket load of market research, but every one of my girlfriends is the target audience, and everyone is sitting at home with their tween and teenage sons. So I literally could put it to my audience and start asking them questions. Is this something that you are also feeling when you're carpooling, when you're looking for products that are deemed appropriate for your tween or teen, putting under their arms, on their body? What products are they using? And then I actually went and started asking the boys themselves again. So this is another step for someone.
Yeah.
Go and speak to your audience. You can't just have it all in here. And sometimes your ideas are not their ideas or what they're wanting. So when it came to the boys, in terms of the branding and even drilling down in terms of the scent later on in that process, I was able to speak to them and get this really rich and robust amount of information from my audience. So that answers the research side of things. And then people are often overwhelmed, but I have to launch this product online. How do I go about this? And I remember being at an event, at a women's networking event, and there was a speaker who had at the time a very successful brand. And I remember, just kind of gauging the right time. Can I approach her after the event? I just would love to be able to pick her brain on how manufacturing for me was the big question mark. How do you do this? What does it mean? How long does it take? How much does it cost? And I remember just gently tapping her on the shoulder after the event, complimenting her on her speech. It was great information. And then I just started to ask a few of those questions. And I was a little bit taken aback because the response wasn't as forthcoming as I thought. So she wasn't really willing to go there and say, well, I've spoken to these manufacturers and they're in Sydney or they're in Melbourne, or this is how I started, and if you want some information. She was actually quite a closed book. I thought that's interesting.
Yeah, why do you think that is? Like the real gatekeeper to her own IP? Do you think she just didn't want to share it with you? Because obviously it was a different product, I'm assuming. Yeah.
Totally different product. She operated in the women's beauty space, and that was made very clear. I said, I'm,
Yeah.
targeting really smelly boys here. So that was made clear. I'm not sure. I just think that along the journey, and I often say this to people who come now to me for a little bit of advice, you'll meet two people. First of all, there will be the gatekeepers, but you might be able to gauge different kinds of information. And then there are the other people where they literally come with their phone books, email addresses, contacts, and they're totally an open book. And they're like, this is what someone did for me one day, and I am now
Yeah,
going
that's
to
nice.
pass that on to you. But what she did say, so even though she didn't divulge the information that I would have liked, she did tell me, go and do this online course, right? It was, and I just remembered going, please remember the name of the course. And I went home and it was about how to launch a digital business. And I remember saying to my husband, who thought I actually had to become a chemist, and he thought
Yeah, I would
something
think so
was
too.
and I can go there as well. But it was about building a digital e-com presence and those steps that you need to take. And I will never be more grateful that she took me down that route, because it was an outstanding, very thorough, very detailed way to kind of map out from idea to execution, the steps along the way. It didn't give ideas of who can manufacture and how much it was going to cost, but it did just break down, know your audience, what is your product, what is the messaging, who are you communicating to? It was really those old school marketing principles, as well as launching online, which was really the part of the economy that had exploded since I had left advertising and marketing 20 years prior. So it was a real nugget of advice. And the other gaps, really, I had to go and do the hard work myself. And I always caveat that this all happened in COVID. So when I was looking for manufacturers, I couldn't go and, rock up on their door or meet them in person, which is how I personally like to operate.
Yeah.
There were a few gambles of doing due diligence, looking for manufacturers. I always knew I wanted to work with a lab, a chemist that was originally in Sydney, because I, post-COVID, wanted to be able to go and see, how does this work? And so that was, again, about research, looking at manufacturers who might do smaller runs of samples and products for a brand like Neon Goat. I certainly wasn't going to invest in doing a run of 10,000 units of a body spray or a natural deodorant if I didn't know that the product ultimately was going to sell. So you just have to know, is that the appropriate manufacturer? Do I need to become a chemist? And a lot of that you can really find out along the way, but there's steps that you have to go through.
Yeah, because I hear a lot of these stories of, especially women coming up with skincare, how they start at their kitchen sink, mixing it all together. Yeah, and you think, oh, is that what you have to do? Do you have to try and make it yourself?
Yeah, I think I often hear, and I'm inspired by women like that, but they often come from some kind of background like that. And I truly believe that you just have to lean in on what is in your wheelhouse. And my wheelhouse was really coming up with the brand, coming up with the messaging, coming up with the tone of voice, coming up with the look and feel, coming up with the brand story. That is rooted in my background of advertising and marketing. And yes, I think it helps to know about ingredients and where you're going to focus on. Is it the natural space? Is it not? But I certainly didn't have to become a chemist. They're the partners, the appropriate partners that you have to find. But I just think it's about leveraging, your strengths, and then you bring on people where those gaps are. So I wasn't that founder, that female founder that you see in the kitchen making the deodorant herself, but I was the founder that was literally writing copy for the website and crafting the messaging to the mums and to the boys, because that is where my background is rooted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you touched on just before your background. So obviously with marketing, advertising, so there would have been a lot of branding. I think what happens is if you've been out of the workforce for a really long time, we tend to forget the skills that we have acquired over the years, and we think we're starting from zero.
Mm,
But
mm,
obviously, all of those skills for you came back in. And I
mm.
think this is a message that I want whoever's listening to this and who might have an idea is that you'll be surprised that you do have skill sets that you probably have forgotten. And do you think, did you feel a little bit like that? And then all of a sudden you started having these light bulb moments of like, oh, okay, yeah, I think I can do it this way. Like your past experience was able to help you in your present to actually push this forward.
Yeah, I'll never forget being on a call with and we might want to chat about this a little bit. Who do you need to surround yourself when you have been out of the traditional workforce
Yes.
for quite an extended period of time? So I was on a call with a mentor. I didn't know at the time she was going to turn out to be a mentor of mine. It was that initial phone call, again in COVID, of I needed to reach out and start surrounding myself just with different like-minded women that were involved in business. I didn't know if they had to be corporate or what their focus was on, but I knew I had to just start networking, for want of a better word. And this mentor said to me when we were going over my background, and I was, a little bit shying away from how many years I'd been a full-time mum, and then it was take me back to before, and I was explaining advertising and marketing, and I lived in New York and I worked on these big brands. And she just said, Jackie, I need to stop you because you're currently sitting in a feeling of a bit of disbelief in yourself. She said, we just need to turn on that light switch. So that advertising account director that took herself to New York at the age of 23, which not many women would do, that light was dimmed for a while it was shining on her family. And I don't want to take away from that. My focus was my family. And I
Yeah.
think I actually brought a lot of those skills that I had to use running very large scale advertising accounts into running a large family as
Yeah.
well. But she said, we just need to turn that light switch on. And sometimes
Mm.
someone shares a nugget like that, and you just have to go, wow, that was me. There was a brave woman, maybe too brave, very, very bold, very, very ambitious. And then there was another chapter in her life. And I also won't forget another previous colleague of mine saying, because she knew how much I had been giving towards my family, and she always said, there will be another chapter. And that really, when I came across your podcast, the second act, for me, I think it's a bit more of my third act. But she said, there will be another chapter after your family. And once, that one individual said, turn on the light switch, I think it does. You just start going, those were many years of working in a very, very intense industry. And yes, the world had changed. So launching an e-com business wasn't as easy
Mm.
as it was in 2024. And those were the gaps I had to fill because I wasn't experienced in that. But that's a matter of learning. They're the hard hours you have to put in. And it took, when I was doing those online courses, the digital courses, doing the research and grinding away at the brand. But you still know that there's a base that will help you kind of activate where you want to go. And it
Yeah.
is a message, as you said, that I do love to share with women when, we're talking about this, that don't ignore the past, lean on the past, because that will fuel what is to come. And it certainly has in my case. It certainly has.
I think if I look back to myself when I started this podcast, and for me that was my new chapter or my second act, there was this excitement that I felt that I hadn't felt in a really, really long time. And I don't know about you, but that's what kept me going because I liked the feeling that I was getting. I thought, I don't want to lose it. I feel like I'm onto something that it's easy to walk away and go, oh, it's just a dream. But
Too much, yeah.
that's the easy option. But I thought, no. And this is where I think if you have it, you've really got to stay with that and you've got
Mm,
to push through and give yourself the opportunity to see where it takes you. I mean, with you, obviously you had this idea and you went down that track, but maybe it mightn't have worked out for you that way, but something else might have worked out. Another door may have opened, but you had the idea, you had that passion, that light bulb had gone off. And I think this is the message. It's like if you have those feelings,
mm.
continue on that path.
Yeah, I think you just have to take that step, and if someone would have presented me with the plan of how many steps it was going to take to
Mm,
actually launch,
yeah.
a sane person would not execute those steps for various
Yeah,
reasons. It's often
of
time,
course.
it's often money. I mean, for myself and, my husband, who was also helping me behind the scenes, this all happened in COVID. There were so many questions around supply chain and budgets, but we just kept on taking the next step. Assume it will work. Bang. What's the next step?
Great.
We hit a crossroads, bang, but what are the next two options if we can't execute on that? Because I think if you are just going from A to Z, it is just too daunting. And when you see these brands on the shelf, or if you see a successful founder, or you go to a website and it all looks so polished and just so fantastic, you don't realize the behind the scenes and how many steps it takes to actually get there. But if you just take those steps, then there will be movement. And I think that's also what this mentor said, that you can't just stay trapped and a little bit scared. You have to kind of go forth in that fear, because that's where great things happen. Great things
Yeah.
happen when things are a bit sticky. And there are often weeks or months where the business isn't shifting and I'm questioning myself and I'm questioning what I'm investing and I'm questioning this. But I think I'm just taking that learning that great things happen from those really sticky, uncomfortable times. It doesn't
Yeah.
happen when it's easy breezy. No one's going to say it's easy breezy. And if they do, it's not a conversation that's worth having. So,
No. And I think, that's bang on. I love that you've said that because it's very easy for us to sit back and see a successful person and, admire them, be envious. But everybody starts at the same place. I have a daughter who she really wants to be an actress. So she has moved to Canada. She's 23 years old, bit similar to you actually in your story, and has just gone, you know what, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to have a go. And I can see how it can get her down, but she
mm,
keeps saying, it's what I really want to do. And I keep on saying to her, just remember all the actors that you see that have made it, like the Margot Robbies of this world, they all started like you. But there was something in them that thought, I'm still going to push through and have a damn go. And that is a great message in itself. It's just very easy to give up, isn't it?
correct. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's the having that fire in your belly, but also you back before you were saying how you surrounded yourself with some really inspiring and good women. I love that. I think as women in midlife, we should back each other. We should really help each other to push ourselves to get to that next stage.
Yeah, it was interesting at the beginning when I started putting myself out there, and it took a lot. Someone said, "Oh, how difficult was it to come up with the brand name and the branding and the packaging and the design?" For me, that actually wasn't that big of a challenge. I can see, and I want to acknowledge for others, that would
Hmm.
be. And I would then suggest there are consultants, there are agencies, there are brand design agencies that can help you fill that gap. I brought that to the table, but what I didn't bring to the table was the confidence that this is where I needed to operate at this stage in my life. And to go to these women's events And often they would say, what have you been doing, or where did you work before? And for me to have to own that part of my story, that the focus was my family, and I'd taken this large amount of time out to manage and to run and to support my family, that for me was actually the boldest move, that I didn't feel like I belonged at those tables or those events.
Yep.
But kept going, and one of my personal kind of goals was to go to these events flying solo, because I just thought that's the way I'm going to push through again. It might be tricky, but I'm going to push through like this. I'm going to meet the right women in the right rooms by
Yeah.
going on my own. And it was hard, Michelle. It is not easy to turn up to these rooms and these events, these women's groups flying solo. And each time I kind of describe it like I chipped away, it actually became easier. And, the next event or 3 events later, there's a familiar face at the table or in the room. And I actually just found that I was finding the right women, that when I was finding a challenge, they didn't even have to be in the space of what I was creating. It was just finding the right women that I could pick up the phone and ask a question or a
Yeah.
bit of extra support, or you join a women's mentoring group that once a month you meet and you discuss and you lift each other up. So those physical networks. And then there were also not virtual networks, but even just listening to podcasts nowadays, especially again during COVID, a lot of us who were taking walks and had the time
Yes.
up our sleeves to do that, that was part of my education and research. So I did a deep dive into female founders, small business, digital business. This was like free classroom, free education. And I often say to people, that's another place to start. There is a wealth of information out
Yep.
there. And one nugget that I will share, because I still say that this helped me to this day, was a host of a podcast was asking, for a piece of advice from her podcast guest. Can you share a piece of advice? And she said, and this was about creating a physical product, so a female founder like myself. And she said, if your product is looking perfect, you have launched too late. And for someone who has a personality like myself, who likes things to look perfect, feel perfect, be perfect, it was a real nugget of advice to go, sometimes you just have to put something out there. And when I look at the first run of Neon Goat, it certainly doesn't look like the run of products I have now going into market. So sometimes you just have to put the product out there. It might not be as perfect as you would like. And that was a real learning for me as well. So sometimes you're learning, from your networks or from a mentor. And other times you can pick it up from a podcast or, from a chat with a friend. So you never know where that, those nuggets of advice are going to come from.
But would you also say, because I relate to that, right? It's not good enough. It took me, because I was similar. I was in COVID, like I want to do something else. So it took me about 2 years to actually have the guts to post a podcast. And I thought, I look back now and I listen to my first one and I think, oh my God. But back then I really struggled with putting myself out there, because I thought it's not shiny like everyone else's. It's not polished. But I do think back, if I hadn't have done it, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. So yes,
Correct.
that is amazing advice. Sometimes you just got to give it a go. And I think people respect you more for that you actually had the courage to do it. Yes, but in your eyes, it's not perfect, but maybe in someone else's eyes, it's good enough, or it is.
And that was the point. They will never know why it's imperfect to you. So, but again, it's all about iterating. And the way that your podcasts look now, as you said, probably don't look like that. But that's the journey that you're on. And again, you're creating a different product now to what you were X years back.
Exactly.
And it's the same for a physical product like mine. So, we'll learn from these, and you just simply can't wait. And the other reason you can't wait is because if you start waiting too long, someone else is going to come in. And I remember my husband, and he comes from a legal background, so he tends to kind of come down quite hard on all of my bold and blazing ideas. But he was like, someone else is going to come and see this opportunity. You know, this is too big an opportunity. So if you don't get in there and you don't, you know, you don't have to be first to market, but if you want to start creating some waves, you have to just deliver the product. So
Absolutely.
you just have to lose that level of perfectionism and let it fly and let it breathe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy that we do that to ourselves because nothing is perfect. It might be in my eyes, but it's not going to be in your eyes. But this is what holds us back so much. But I actually thought that before we got on. It's like if you have this idea and you've had it there for a long time, the more time you let it go and you're not doing anything else about it, someone is going to do it. That person might not do it in the way you're going to do it. So again, that shouldn't hold you back.
Mm.
But you are going to kick yourself because you
Okay.
think, oh, I should have done this. Why didn't I? And I think that in itself is enough to even put you off more so to go, oh, okay, I'm just going to give up because she's done it now. So what's the point? But at the end of the day, just have a go and just do it. And, you can't be expected as a founder to know how to do everything. I think this is where
Yeah.
a lot of people burn out as well because
Mm.
they're trying to do everything. And there are experts who can help you and probably save you a lot of time and money
Mm.
by actually getting that advice. So I think that's really good advice what you've given. But now I've noticed that you are in the supermarkets. Is that right?
I'm in some health food stores actually at the
Okay.
moment. The goal is for Neon Goat to be available on a supermarket shelf, and those conversations have been going for 12 plus months. And again, if any of your listeners want to reach out and ask me about that, again, it's something that I'm not there yet, but I know what it takes to at least start those conversations, and they're very, very lengthy conversations. So again, when you see a brand on a supermarket shelf, that is certainly not a one conversation and boom, you're on a shelf. Those conversations can start 2 years ahead of that. My first goal after launching online was to get that tick of approval, for want of a better term, that the health food stores support Neon Goat
Mm,
ingredients wise, and this is something that we would want to share with our customers. And then the next level, perhaps, and I'm still toying with the idea if that is the right channel to go down to the larger retailers in our Australian landscape. So
yeah. And tell me the name. What does it stand for?
people often ask that. Most people say it's a great name. It's very cool. The boys love it. The mums love it.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's just a bit of my background. I guess it's just that creative spirit in those early COVID days when I was dreaming and letting myself go down the path to dream about this brand. I was literally just hit with these two words, neon and goat, for various reasons. But it literally means shining a bright light on our greatest of all time. So the neon is the shining a light on this audience of boys that are often misunderstood and overlooked. And goat is a
Yeah.
term that is really a term used by the boys themselves, referring to great athletes predominantly. And that became the brand and
I
the
love
vision.
it. It's catchy.
Goats. So yeah, very happy with the name. Very happy with the name.
And how has your product been received in the market?
I think it's been actually I take that back. I don't think it has been received very well by both those audiences. So um I guess in various aspects, like in the first year, even going on to the second year, you really have to focus on, I guess it's kind of getting that seal of approval. So I was submitting my products, the Neon Goat products, for naturally good awards and events, trying to get awards and, these accolades to put on
Mm.
your website, because that is giving these newer brands visibility and credibility. And even within year one, there was a lot of support for the products that I had created and launched. So I was getting some approval from industry experts and leaders. Interestingly, they never really knew where to put Neon Goat. Is
Yeah.
it in beauty? Was it women's? But there was no teenage boys. There might have been men's, but there was nothing for youth. Is it skincare? Is it body care? But I just kept on submitting the products to various awards, and very proud that that my products were winning in certain niches where it was understood. But most importantly, it was the feedback from the mums, but most importantly from the boys
Of
themselves,
course.
that they were actually using the product. And when you're talking about tweens, a lot of it is actually you're trying to educate your tween in habit forming, so you have to use these products before school. You might have to use them after, sweating at lunchtime, or before you get into mum or dad's car on the way to footy or soccer. So the boys are using the product. The parents are very grateful that other toxic sprays are not being sprayed in their car on those carpools home to and from school. So as I say, so far so good. And since launching, we've come out with newer products to support the boys on their journey as well. So as I said, first and foremost, the fact that the boys are actually enjoying it and using it is what makes me most proud. And I love nothing more than to hear feedback from boys, and it can come from their mums or dads too as well. So since launching Neon Goat, when I launched with 2 products, we've now iterated and come out with different versions of the body sprays, and there's obviously a really large vision for more products to come. But it's just great, when you might be on the socials, or it might be in reviews, or as I mentioned previously, it might be in awards that, we submit our products forward to. So the feedback is positive, and I guess that's all that matters.
And you're in, how many years have you been doing this now?
I launched nearly 3 years is when Neon Goat launched, but I also like to share to people that there's also 2 years before where you're actually doing the product creation and obviously the ideation. So it's not a blip in the radar, and I think this is quite a challenging time for a lot of small business. Can you push through at this phase of the business where you're growing? You have certain opportunities to scale, but you still have to be quite cautious. So I think it certainly is coming with with its challenges. And I always like to be, very honest with other, women or other people that come, just for a chat or looking for advice as well. Different stages of the business obviously bring different challenges. And we're now in that kind of middle ground of, are you wanting to really scale it to that level, or is it smarter to kind of stay at a different level of business? Both are very valid options.
Yeah. Now I can imagine, obviously, you trial and test, and there are mistakes along the way. Is there anything that you would advise someone not to do?
Oh, that's a very good question. Something I would advise them not to do. I would probably go back to what we were talking about before, about not being stuck somewhere for too long.
Yeah.
That you have to keep moving forward. So if it's about, refining a product, or refining a design, or refining a piece of marketing, just to keep moving, because movement will create the next opportunity. Might not be the opportunity that you were heading towards, but it will just kind of keep the momentum going in the business, to kind of just not be stuck in something, and
Yeah.
that can be on various scopes of a project, of a project. It could be a small decision or quite a large decision, but just to keep moving through, you just can't can't stay still for too long.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think that's very good advice. So,
Mm.
Jackie, now that you've gone through all of that, and you're still obviously growing your brand, and that's amazing. What has it done for you personally? If you look at the Jackie of 5 years ago to the Jackie of today, like what's it done for you, and how have you changed?
I can hand on my heart say I've changed for the better, and I don't think we often pat ourselves on the back enough to allow ourselves to feel like that. I have pushed through. I have made change. I have put myself in very uncomfortable situations. I have put myself out there. I mean, imagine a 46-year-old woman having to start going on TikTok and Instagram. It's not something I want to do.
No.
It's something I need to do for the business. And, sometimes you just have to put those blinkers on, and there could be a bit of chatter from girlfriends or whoever's seeing what you're putting out there. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I've created something, I've created a brand, I've created products. They're being well received. I don't know where this journey is going, but I can say that I've enjoyed the journey, and it's been really challenging. But as we've discussed, when you put yourself outside of your comfort zone, really great things can happen. And I can look back, and I can kind of, whether or not my children see it is another question. But it was also for them to show them that it's not too late.
Yes.
Yes, I was around for those years, and I was very much present in their lives, and I still am. I don't think I've dropped the ball too many times, but they're at a very different stage. And I want to, look back and show them that there can be different iterations, even on their journey. It's not just about having a family or not, but if you have an idea, just give it a go.
Yeah, love. That's great advice. Thank you.
Mhm.
I have really, really enjoyed this conversation, Jackie, because even myself, you have these ideas, but it's so easy to talk yourself out of them. So I think when we hear someone who's actually gone and done it, it's inspiring. And yeah, so thank you for sharing your story. Now, I love to end all my episodes with an inspirational quote. Would you like to share yours with us?
Yes, I had this one on my mood board. I'm still very old school, and I have Post-it notes and whiteboards
Love
all
it.
around my study, and I don't like to misquote great people. So
Okay.
Michelle Obama, who is a fantastic woman and inspires many around her, her quote, "Your story doesn't end where you think it does. It just begins a new chapter." And I put that on my mood board many years ago because I think with Neon Goat, I'm heading in one direction. But we actually don't know. It might
No.
be, as you mentioned during our chat, it might just be opening a door to something quite different. But I'm definitely on the journey, and I like having that kind of just around wherever I am in my workspace. And, I am on this journey, but we certainly don't know where this is heading.
We
So
don't. It's just continue on and have the faith that something will happen. Yeah, I
thank you.
love
And
it.
thank you for supporting women and opening up these conversations, because it is podcasts exactly like your second act that have inspired me along the way as
Thank
well.
you. Thank you. Absolutely. Well, I will link all your details in the show notes. Go and try Neon Goat. It sounds amazing. And I can't wait to see it, where it's going to go. And I'm sure I'm going to be seeing it on a supermarket shelf pretty soon. So, all the very best, Jackie. And thank you so much for giving your time to share your
Thank you for
story.
your time. Thank you, Michelle. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Your Second Act. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you could rate and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback means the world to me.